Hello, good day everyone. So once again, I'm your instructor for this subject. I'm Mr. Michael C. Jamilon. So today we'll be talking about qualitative research design. In a previous video, we had already defined and discussed about the research design, and then we ended up with a thorough discussion about quantitative research design and its various variants. So we'll be focusing our discussion or our lecture today on qualitative research design. So no need for me to define qualitative research design. So no need for us to define what it's meant, because I personally believe that you are already familiar with the definition of this. So we'll be focusing on these four variants of qualitative research design, as these are the four most common types of qualitative research design. So there are actually more than four of this, pero we focus on these four na lang muna. So we'd rather talk more about this four than indulge ourselves with with five or more than six classifications of qualitative research design, pero we'd rather talk less about those naman. So we'd rather focus on these four, which are firstly phenomenology, secondly case study, third narrative research, and then last, the most complicated one, we have grounded theory. So we basically start first with phenomenology. So phenomenology comes from of course, it has a root word, phenomenon. So a phenomenon roughly refers to an observable facts or event or situation. Or it may refer to any situation, concern, problem, topic, issue that is of interest to a researcher. So as a qualitative research design, phenomenology attempts to examine human experiences through the descriptions provided by the people involved. So we have to highlight two important concepts here. Firstly, human experience, and second, we have the people involved. So when you say human experiences are by themselves subjective experiences. So kapag kasi sinabi natin subjective experiences, it depends upon the experience or kung paano ito pinagdaanan ng taong involved doon sa experience na iyan or sa karanasan na iyan. So lahat naman tayo, all of us have experienced something that are not experienced by another, even though pareho kayo ng sitwasyon. Okay? You may have experienced something, pero a person who have experienced or who has experienced the same thing may not experience the same extent or degree or level of the kind of experience that you have experienced, if that makes sense. Okay, so these experiences are called as lived experience. So lived experience, because once again, it depends on how that person or that individual has undergone or has gone through such experience. So ultimately, the goal of phenomenological studies is to describe the meaning that this subjective or lived experience hold for each subject or participant of the study. So, ang pinaka-aim daw ng phenomenological study ay i-describe faithfully itong essence or ibig sabihin ng mga experiences na ito, depende doon sa pagkaka-describe or pagkakabanggit or pagkakasabi ng subjects or subject na tinatawag. This type of research is used to study areas in which there is little knowledge about. So anyway, these are subjective experiences naman. So mostly or probably all of this are of interest or medyo limited yung knowledge ng mga tao tungkol sa mga personal experiences na to, that are of course first and foremost must be interesting muna. Okay. So, to understand the so-called lived experience from the vantage point of the subject, so para mas maintindihan natin or mas malaman natin in depth or in detail yung lived experience doon sa punto mismo or perspektibo ng subject or main participant of the study, yung researcher, ikaw, must first take into account his or her own beliefs and feelings. So kailangan suriin mo muna yung sarili mo, yung mga sariling paniniwala mo, pakiramdam mo, and others, and you have to identify this, okay? And then after that, you have to deliberately put aside these ideas, feelings, or beliefs para mas mapagtuunan mo ng pansin yung pinag-aaralan mo. So itong proseso na to, tinatawag natin itong bracketing. Okay? So sa bracketing, kasi you have to set aside your ideas about the phenomenon because only then it will be possible for you as the researcher to experience from the eyes of the person who has lived the experience. So once again, simply put, you have to set aside, okay, throw away out of the window or out of the door your preconceived notions, your suppositions, beliefs, feelings about that experience para mas mapagtuunan mo ng yung experience ng taong pinag-aaralan mo. So that's phenomenology. All right. So example. So of course, you being students, and of course there are some of you who are from what we term as remote areas. So phenomenological research would ask a question such as, what is it like to be a student in remote areas in the time of online learning? So paano nga ba yung karanasan ng isang estudyante in the time of online learning pero nakatira siya sa isang lugar na walang cellphone signal? Okay, so as the researcher, meron tayong sariling perception, ano? So we might feel very hopeless, or we might feel challenged, or we might even feel inspired if we are in the situation or if we are in the shoes of the students who are experiencing difficulty sa online learning. But then again, if you are the researcher, you have to set aside these feelings, and then you have to identify these feelings and put this aside to listen to what the students are saying about how they are living through this experience. So i-perform natin ang bracketing, may sarili tayong opinion, for sure napagdaanan din natin yung mga karanasan na yan ng mga students who are photographed dyan sa mga photos na makikita natin sa screen natin. But then again, kailangan nating iset aside itong mga ito para mas mapagtuunan natin ng pansin yung live experiences ng mga estudyante na mga ito. Kasi magkakaiba kayo ng pangunawa, magkakaiba kayo ng sitwasyon, magkakaiba kayo ng level, extent, or degree of such same experience na tinatawag. Alright, so these are the basic steps in phenomenology. Okay, so regardless of the variants of phenomenology. So firstly, of course, like all other research endeavors or research methods, you have to choose your topic first or identify your research problem or focus on a phenomenon. So for example, you might be interested in online learning. So you might be interested on what is it like to be a student during this pandemic, so to speak. Or you might be interested into answering the question or attempting to find answers to the question, how is it like to be a person who has undergone, or paano nga ba yung karanasan ng isang tao na nakaranas na mabagyo or masiraan ng bahay sa kasagsagan ng bagyo. Okay, so you might be interested on that as your topic. Okay, so you identify now your research problem and then focus on that so-called phenomenon. Okay, and then here comes now the problem. So you now have to select or recruit your sample population or the participants of your study. For example, napili mo yung live experience ng isang tao na nakaranas na masiraan ng bahay during a calamity or a disaster such as a typhoon. So you might have recruited somebody na. So what happens now is that you now have to perform bracketing. So yung bracketing na tinatawag natin kanina, taking yourself out of the study even though you have your suppositions, interpretations, judgments, or beliefs, kailangan mo munang isuspend itong mga bagay na ito para mapagtuunan mo ng pansin yung live experience ng taong gusto mong aralan or aralin yung kanyang live experience na tinatawag. So only then after performing bracketing, okay, so tinake note mo na yung mga iyan, and then they are your guides actually when you are when you will be doing your study later on. You now have to interview participants. Okay, so there are about 5 minimum na bilang daw ng participants according to a certain researcher that I failed to mention here. So minimum of 5. And then when you are doing your interview, you have to observe these so-called protocols or interview etiquettes. So exclusively, you have to actively listen, okay, to the participant or to the subject of your study. And then, most importantly of all, ito yung kailangan mong gawin, ano, do not ever interrupt your participant whenever he or she is recounting or recalling or telling you his or her lived experience. So, as for me, I had already interviewed somebody who has undergone such a situation na nasiraan sila ng bahay, and he recalled vividly what happened in 2011. So, here's an excerpt of that interview.
Naranasan ko na pinaka malakas na disaster yung bagyong 2011, 2012.
Okay, transcribe natin yan, ano, transcription. Okay.
Nung kasalukuyan yung bagyong Juan, tamang-tama punta kami na kasi nagtuturo yung misis ko sa daycare. Pinunta namin yung Juan niya, yung school. Ngayon, nung pumunta kami ng school, hindi na kami nakabalik sa bahay dahil sa lakas. Doon na rin kami na ng bagyo na buta. Yung sa lakas ng impact ng bagyo, halos kalaging niya yung bubong na mga bintana ng school niya, talagang talbog. Doon kami tumago nga sa sa may CR. Talagang hindi ka makakalabas talaga. Kita mo sa labas talagang nangingitim yung lakas ng nagwiwisel siya. Tapos yung sa lupa parang kumukulog sa loob na parang meron siyang umaararo. Talagang yun ang naranasan ko talaga. Paano po yung
Alright, so as listened by you, so after interviewing the participant or the participants of your study, you know how to transcribe. Okay, so this is now one of the most difficult tasks sa phenomenology or any of those qualitative research methods. Sa transcription basically means you have to listen to that recorded interview and then you have to transcribe. So ilipat mo siya sa isang notebook and then word for word mong ililipat yung lahat ng words. So anyway, as for me, I've done a word for word transcription of that interview. So makikita nyo maski yung maski yung unnecessary words nilagay ko dyan. So meron ka namang option to remove those unnecessary words later on para ma-cleanse mo yung data, so to speak. Pero in essence, this is a sample of a transcription based from the interview I did in 2018 of a person who has experienced being in the midst of a destructive typhoon in 2011. So after interviewing the participants now and transcribing the interviews, you now have to perform data analysis. So sa data analysis na tinatawag, you have to highlight the significant statement or quotes from the data obtained. So you have to make sense dun sa statements, you have to make sense of the words, the phrases, or the sentences contained in those statements coming from your participants of the study. Okay? So ito, isa lang naman na transcription yan. Pero syempre you have to basically ask 5 persons and then they will tell you different versions of that experience themselves. So you have to make sense of the data and perform horizontalization. Pag sinabi nating horizontalization, you have to make sure that you lay out all the data and analyze them equally na tinatawag. So, yung data analysis sa pag-perform dyan, you just highlight, pick out the significant statement or quotes from the data obtained. So, makikita, madali lang naman matignan or makita dun sa statements na yan ng in-interview ko, yung significant statements or quotes coming from him. Okay? So, after that, after data analysis, you now have to develop clusters of meaning as the 7th step. So, meron kang dalawang types of description na i-build dito. Okay, firstly, you have your textual description. Basically, textual description refers to what the participants experience about the phenomenon. So, makikita natin sa transcription, halimbawa, yan yung textual description na ano natin, ano? So, what the participants' experience about the phenomenon. So, textual description yan. Secondly, you have your structural description. So, structural description, the context or setting that influence how the participants experience the phenomenon. So, it may not be expressed there, yung structural description natin, pero malalaman mo more or less yung structural description when you are already in that place na kung saan doon dinanas ng participant yung karanasan niya na iyon. Pero you have to ask him then kung maaring describe din niya yung context or setting na naka-impluwensya sa kanya sa kung paano niya naranasan yung phenomenon na ganon. Okay? So, from those structural or textual descriptions for the 8th step, you, the researcher, now has to write a composite description that presents or captures the essence of the phenomenon. So magpa-perform ka na ngayon ng panibagong step na kung saan i-review mo yung mga statements na iyon, yung based on the textual or structural descriptions, you now have to categorize or classify those descriptions into themes to make sense of the data. So after performing those, you now have to perform the 9th step, which is of course, assuming na natapos mo na, report now the findings to the participants or to the community. So meron tayong tatlong focus dito sa phenomenology. You as the researcher, perform bracketing, the participant as the focus, and thirdly, the community as the focus. Alright, so those are the basic steps in phenomenology regardless of the types or variants of phenomenology. So speaking of types of phenomenology or variants of phenomenology, meron tayong dalawa. Okay, firstly, we have hermeneutic phenomenology. So hermeneutic phenomenology, hermeneutics basically refers to an interpretation. So when we apply hermeneutic phenomenology, basically means it provides description and the researcher's interpretation of lived experience about a phenomenon. So, yung lived experiences ng individual or ng subject of the study ay described by the participant but then again interpreted by the researcher. So, it's the lived experience that are being interpreted by the researcher and described by the researcher dun sa kanyang phenomenological study na tinatawag. So all we have to remember here, the individual recounts or tells his or her experience or lived experience. The researcher will now have to record the interview, transcribe the interview, and then later on interpret such lived experience as told by the participant or the subject of the study. Okay, pangalawang klase ng phenomenology is we have transcendental phenomenology. So, transcendental basically means going beyond. So, in contrast to an hermeneutic phenomenology, a transcendental phenomenology exercise epoche. Pag sinabi nating epoche means suspension of judgment. Okay, so this is somehow related to the concept of bracketing, pero it can also be performed in an hermeneutic phenomenology. So, in an epoche, you have to suspend your judgment, you have to set aside your personal feelings or judgments, okay? Para makapagbigay ka or makapag-provide ka ng faithful description and meanings of the lived experiences about the phenomenon. Now, ang pagkakaiba ng hermeneutic at transcendental is that ang hermeneutic, ito ay described by and interpreted by the researcher. Sa transcendental, as is, the researcher will not interpret the lived experiences about the phenomenon of the participant or the subject of the study, but rather magbibigay siya ng faithful description and meaning as described by the researcher. So that's the difference between the two. Okay, so to put it simply, okay, to provide you a better example para makapagbigay tayo ng illustration sa application ng hermeneutic at transcendental phenomenology. Ang hermeneutic phenomenology, for example, the topic is all about remote learning, as experienced by students, the lived experiences of students in a remote area during a remote learning, so to speak. Sa hermeneutic phenomenology, the researcher interviews the students and then describes and interprets their personal experiences about the difficulties they face about online learning. So that's hermeneutic phenomenology. Sa transcendental phenomenology, kapag i-apply natin ito doon sa same phenomenon or topic about remote learning and the lived experiences of the students, the researcher interviews the students, but then he believes that the only individuals who may be able to explain and describe the phenomenon are the ones who actually experience them. So, kumbaga, parang documentary na you let the participants tell the story without a narrator, so to speak. Kasi sa hermeneutic, parang yung researcher yung narrator. Nina-narrate niya, din-describe niya, in-interpret niya yung live experience ng participant or subject of the study. Sa transcendental, you let the participant of the subject of the study be the actor, director, and narrator of the story that he or she has experienced himself or herself. So basically parang ganun, ano? Yung application or aplikasyon ng hermeneutic at transcendental phenomenology. Hermeneutic, interpretation of the researcher; transcendental, going beyond na tinatawag. Alright, so I hope very clear sa inyo yung types of phenomenology and what phenomenology means. Okay, we now proceed with the second. So we have case study design. So this is the most common type of qualitative research design. I do this all the time whenever I do qualitative research. Okay. Sa case study design, it's a design that explores a case. A case, madedefine natin yan mamaya. A single case or multiple cases through detailed or in-depth data collection through interviews and triangulation of data involving multiple sources of information and reports, case description, and case-based themes. Pero we need to highlight here yung ibig sabihin ng case. Ano nga bang ibig sabihin ng salita or ng konsepto ng case? Case could be an individual, tao, a group of individuals, a community, okay, an instance, an episode, an event, a subgroup of a population, a town, or a city. So, these are good sources of cases na po pwede mong maging topics para sa case study research mo. To be called a case study, it is important to treat the total study population as one study na tinatawag. So basically, that's pretty much self-explanatory. Alright, so in a case study design, it's very useful design when exploring an area where little is known or where you want to have a holistic understanding of the situation, phenomenon, episode, site, group, or community. So napaka-importante or napakahalaga na design na ito kapag ang research mo ay tungkol sa pag-aaral ng isang topic na kakaunti lang ang alam ng mga tao or gusto mo naman na mabigyan ka ng kasagutan or mabigyan ka ng holistic na pangunawa about sa isang specific na sitwasyon, pangyayari, episode, lugar, grupo, or komunidad na tinatawag. So though you can use single method, the use of multiple methods to collect data is an important aspect of a case study. So this is something that you should remember, ano? Namely, ano tong mga multiple methods na to sa pag-collect mo ng data for a case study. In-depth interviewing. So you either do focus group discussions, panel discussions, or personal or one-on-one interviews. Obtaining information from secondary records, gathering data through observations, collecting information through focus groups, and group interviews. So ito yung mga iba't ibang data collection methods or tools or instruments that you can use in order for you to provide you tools to provide you answers to your research questions, particularly kapag case study ang gagawin mo. So meron tayong types of case study design. So for the purpose of our discussion, I only have to introduce 3, although we have more than 3 types of case study design. So firstly, we have single instrumental case study. Ang single instrumental case study, it's a case selected to illustrate an issue. So single instrumental ha, isa lang ang pipiliin mo na magiging focus ng pag-aaral mo. So for example, of a case study design, using the single instrumental, we have a possible topic, no, religious conversion of a dumagat community in the Vilacan, Isabela. So, ang case mo dito is the religious conversion of a dumagat community. So, parang sa single instrumental, pipili ka ng case and that case you think is representative of other cases in other communities. Ano? Na parang same lang yung process nila pero ang pinili mo ay sila. Okay? So, ang mga dumagat ay makikita usually along the length of the Sierra Madre mountain range, ano? So from Cagayan all the way to Quezon province. So they are nomads. So basically, very recent lang silang na-convert into Christianity na tinatawag. Pero if you are interested into finding out how did the process that they had undergone para makapag-convert into various religions, ano, so this you can use single instrumental para dito. Or if not, you can use naman yung emergence of volunteerism amidst the pandemic in Ifugao. So you can have that as well as an example of a topic na single instrumental case study. Okay, secondly, you have the intrinsic case study. Ang intrinsic case study naman, it presents an unusual case or unique situation. So, highlight natin dito yung concepts ng unusual case or unique situation. Kaya siya tinawag na intrinsic. Case presents a phenomenon which has never been studied before. So, ano yung something, ano yung kaso, sitwasyon, event, topic, grupo ng mga tao, community na very unusual or napaka-unique yung kanilang sitwasyon. So, maaari mong gamitin ang intrinsic case study. So, to illustrate intrinsic case study, here's a topic, the non-existence of political dynasties in Ifugao. So, we all know that na in comparison to other provinces in the Philippines, Ifugao, to my knowledge, does not have political dynasties. At least, so hindi ang politika kumbaga dito sa Ifugao does not run in family, so it's not a family business in comparison to other provinces. So you might be interested in the finding out why, how. So you can have an intrinsic case study for that purpose. Okay, for the third type, you have your collective or multiple case study. So in contrast to single instrumental, ang collective naman or multiple case study marami. So you have to select multiple cases to explore a concern, multiple cases to show differences, and at the same time, show similarities na tinatawag. So, makikita natin later on when I provide you the example, the difference between the single instrumental and multiple case study or collective case study. So, here is an example. The implementation of K-12 in schools in the Philippines. I think it's high time, no, na pag-aralan natin yung implementasyon ng K-12 sa mga paaralan sa Pilipinas, ano. So multiple cases 'yan. So halimbawa, ano yung differences ng implementation ng K-12 sa Ifugao from the province of Isabela to the province of Lanao del Norte, for example. So this may be good sources of cases with which you can conduct your multiple case study or collective case study na tinatawag. So magpo-focus ka lamang sa mga cases na ito para magbigay ka or makapag-provide ka ng differences or para ma-seek mo yung differences and at the same time similarities between the implementation of K-12 in schools in the Philippines na tinatawag. Or political dynasties in rural and urban areas or provinces in the Philippines. So this may be a good topic if you're going to use multiple case study. So that's for the case study design. Okay, so penultimate na tayo, third to the last. Okay, third, we have narrative research design. So ano naman ang ibig sabihin ng narrative research design? So, ang narrative research design, a design in which narrative, ang term na narrative is understood as first, a spoken, pananalita, or written text. So, ano yung purpose ng spoken or written text na to? They provide or gives an account, okay, storya, okay, naratibo ng isang pangyayaring event or action or series of events or actions that are chronologically connected according to Charnowska. So chronologically connected meaning from day 1 to day 100, so to speak, from the year 1995 to 2005. So parang ganon ang narrative na tinatawag. So once again, naratibo, ang term or konsepto ng naratibo ay isang either spoken or written text na nagbibigay ng kwento na ukol sa isang pangyayari that are chronologically connected na tinatawag. Okay, so narratives inquiry is stories lived and told. So, isa siyang uri ng kwento na lived and told. So, na naranasan ng tao and then told to somebody, presumably the researcher. Okay, so madali lang intindihin ang ibig sabihin ng narrative research design, ano? So, introduce na natin yung types of narrative research design. These are, first, we have biography. So, biography, the researcher writes the biography of another person's life. So, for example, you, as the student, writes the story of the life of Michael Jamidon. So, you are writing a biography. So, remember dito ha, chronologically connected ito. But then again, nakadepende na yan sa diskarte ng researcher or writer. Autobiography naman, written by the individuals who are also the subjects of the study. So, it's a biography written by the person or the subject of the study himself or herself. So, that's the difference between the two. Life histories naman, write-up of an individual entire life. Somehow may similarity ang life histories sa biography and autobiography, because they mean they tackle or they narrate the same thing. Okay, fourth, personal experience story. So it's a study of someone's personal experience found in single or multiple episodes or private situations. So, madali lang intindihin yan. And then oral history. So, usually, ito for historical researches. So, gathering personal reflections of events and their causes and effects from an individual or several individuals. So, sa lahat ng klase ng qualitative research design, ito yung pinakamadaling gawin at at the same time, very time-consuming din na gawin because you are talking about a person's life here as told by them, lived by them, as told to you, and you have to be written by you. One good example of a narrative research design that I read was the story of an HIV positive individual. It's a very good story. It's a very thought-provoking story. So parang it's as if you're reading a novel, but then again it's non-fiction because it refers to the life of that individual who has suffered so much simply because of being an HIV positive. Okay, so dito na tayo sa pinaka-komplikado, no? So we have now grounded theory design. So bakit siya tinawag na grounded theory design? Alright, so a grounded theory design, it enables you to study a particular phenomenon or process and discover new theories that are based on the collection and analysis of real-world data. So parang phenomenology on steroids, yun yung grounded theory design. So, ang grounded theory design, it's a type of qualitative research design na in comparison to the phenomenology na you only have to describe or interpret or faithfully describe the lived experiences of an individual or to case study na gagawan mo ng research, mag-interview ka, collect the data, and do your case or narrative na you interview participants or subjects of the study and then you narrate or tell their stories. In a grounded theory kasi, as you collect your data, of course you have to do interviews, you have to conduct interviews. But then again, as you collect your data and as you analyze your data, magka-create ka ng new theory. Kaya siya tinawag na grounded theory design kasi you have to make, you have to build, you have to create your theory based or out of those analysis or data collection that you are doing. So parang walang theoretical framework ang study mo. Kumbaga, so parang hindi ka guided by theories. For example, bagkus magagawa ka ng research mo na wala kang kasiguraduhan whether or not makaka-create ka ng theory. But then again, ultimately, as you collect your data, as you do in-depth data analysis, it leads you to the creation of this new theory out of those collected and analyzed data. So am I making myself clear? Parang malabo, ano? So kung malabo yan, okay, so ganito yan. The process of data collection, pag-collect ng data through interviews, data analysis through codings na tinatawag, and theory development. So this is the most important thing in a grounded theory design. Theory development. So, itong tatlo na activities na ito, itong tatlong processes na to wit, data collection, data analysis, and theory development, they all happen in an iterative process. So that's why grounded theory is very complicated simply because it's iterative. Pag sinabi nating iterative, repetitive, uulit-ulitin mo siya. So, magre-recruit ka ng participants, mag-interview ka ng participants. For example, ang original na participants mo ay 5, pero nakukulangan ka sa data. Kailangan mo mag-recruit ulit at kailangan mo mag-interview ulit at kailangan mo mag-coding ulit at mag-analyze ng data hanggang sa marating mo yung tinatawag nating theoretical saturation. Okay? Iterative data collection or repetitive data collection and analysis occurs until you reach theoretical saturation. Ang ibig sabihin, class, ng theoretical saturation, it's the point in your research when you no longer have any data to be collected or more or less you are already satisfied with your data collected. Parang ang theoretical saturation, it is out of the convenience or the comfort level na din ng researcher, ano, kasi either pagod ka na, pero wag naman yung ganun yung reason dapat, ano. Theoretical saturation means wala ka nang makolek pa na data kasi may theory ka na. It is very different to wala kang makolek na data kasi tinatamad ka na. So those two are different things. The other one refers to a theoretical saturation. The other one simply refers to laziness on the part of the researcher. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng theoretical saturation. It's that point in time in the researcher's life or journey that he or she no longer has any data to be collected because he now has or she now has a theory for that study. So, there are two types of grounded theory design, ano? Okay, first one, we have Strauss's and Glazer's grounded theory approach. So, i-discuss natin ito one by one later. So, it's systematic. Systematic kasi it follows these 3-step procedures in coding data. Okay, so in Strauss's and Glazer's grounded theory approach, the researcher is a neutral observer. So parang ito yung pinaka-original na grounded theory design, ano? So parang ito kasi, itong dalawa na to, particularly si Strauss and Glazer, they originally did a study about how is it like to die. So parang they did a qualitative study on dying, ano? They interviewed somebody who is about to die. But then again, wala silang parang nakukulangan sila sa qualitative, nakukulangan sila sa mga methods offered by the methods under qualitative research design. So they did a groundbreaking, different, all new qualitative research design and thus sprung what we now know as grounded theory design. So the researcher in grounded theory design as prescribed by Strauss and Glazers is a neutral observer, meaning passive ka lang, okay? In contrast to The second type of grounded theory designed by Shormas, Shormas constructivist approach naman, na gumagamit ng conditional and consequential matrix as coding device. I will be explaining all this later. In comparison to Strauss and Glazer's GT approach, in Shormas, the researcher is co-participant in the study. So kumbaga parang yung researcher sa approach ni Strauss and Glaser, neutral observer, para siyang doon sa transcendental phenomenology. Kay Shormas naman, parang siya yung sa hermeneutic phenomenology because the researcher is co-participant in the study, taken into account yung researcher's judgments, feelings, and so on, and then isusulat niya mga iyon as guide doon sa kanyang pag-build ng theory at pag-collect ng data whenever mag-analyze na siya ng data later on. Okay, so we start with Strauss and Glazer's GT approach, So, 3-step procedures encoding data. So, parang ito yung pinaka-summary ng grounded theory process as prescribed by Strauss and Glaser. So, it starts with the research question, followed by data collection, which is either through ethnography, intensive interviewing, and textual analysis. So, same thing then with phenomenology. And then you do initial coding. And then after that, you do focus coding. And then from those codes, you now have to categorize those codes into categories. So line by line coding yan, comparing incidents mo, and then magkakaroon ka na ng access. And from those access na tinatawag, you now create your categories, or what we call as selective coding. So from those categories, you now build relationships between one category to another. And then once you do all this, you now have your theoretical statement or your theory. Medyo complicated to understand. Pero, to put it simply, class, parang ganito yan. So I have provided you a simpler, better way to put the grounded theory process as prescribed by Glaser and Strauss as follows. So yung 3-step procedure encoding data, meron kasi tayong tatlong steps, meron tayong tatlong coding techniques. Okay, first one, this is what we call as the first coding. So you take your textual data and break it up into discrete parts. So yung transcript ng interview mo, okay, so syempre itatranscribe mo na, mag-interview ka and then itatranscribe mo na. So yung transcription mo na yon, babasahin mo yung mga statements, okay, isusuriin mo yung mga statements, and then you break those statements into discrete parts. Okay? So from those statements ngayon, ika-categorize mo na siya into codes. Yung codes, themes na tinatawag natin, Okay, for example, sa transcript mo about a person you had interviewed about an experience tungkol sa bagyo. Okay, so yung mga statements nila po pwede mong i-categorize ngayon yan para kang makagawa ka ng theme or code na tinatawag. So pagka nag-interview ka na and they all stated the same thing pero stated in different words or different manners, pero they all mean the same thing. If they all mean the same thing, it is one code na tinatawag. So that's for the first step. So for the second, you now draw connections between your codes. So yung connections between the codes that you had constructed, we call that one as access na tinatawag. So that's why number 2 refers to actual coding. Yung number 1, that's open coding na tinatawag. Number 2, actual coding. Kasi from the codes that you have done, i-connect mo itong mga codes na to. Depende yan kung nag-harmonize ba itong mga codes na to. Kapag ka nag-harmonize yung isa or dalawang code or tatlong code, i-draw mo yung connections nila together para makagawa ka ng category na tinatawag. So itong category na to, it refers to the similarities between the 3 codes or themes that you had done. So that is for actual coding. And from there, you now have to do your selective coding. So, ito na yung number 3 step, wherein you are now to do your core category. For selective coding, you select one central category that connects all the codes from your analysis and captures the essence of your research. So, kumbaga, ito na yung pinaka-last step, So, from those codes that you had done, that you had gathered from your open coding, and you had categorized those codes into a category for your actual coding, yung mga categories naman na nag-gather mo dun sa second step, ika-categorize mo ngayon yung mga categories na to into a core category. So yung core category, eto na yung magjo-join together dun sa similarities between the different categories that you had constructed. So, itong core category na to, this now refers or this now captures yung pinaka-essence ng research mo. So, hopefully malinaw sa inyo itong process ng grounded theory design or research design. Okay, so kay Chalmers naman sa kanyang constructivist theory, conditional or consequential matrix naman yung ginagamit as coding device. So as you can see here, the process done or the approach which is constructivist by Chalmers is very complicated kasi gumagamit siya ng tinatawag nating conditional or consequential matrix. So makikita nyo sa baba ko yung conditional matrix na yan. So parang concentric circles siya that depicts the micro and macro themes or concepts. So parang makikita nyo dyan, for example, the main theme there is justifying decision reasonably in dominating orientation. And then meron tayong concentric circle enveloping that. So you have efficiency, tolerated divergent views, and so on. And then from yung concentric circle na yan, another circle above that na themes na naman or categories or codes pursuing the right approach, forming conjectures, and so on. And then from there, bubuo ka na ngayon ng panibagong concentric circle mo na mag-join together doon sa different themes or codes na ginawa mo. So complying requirements, and being careful and prudent. So this is a more systematic approach to, or a more systematic revision of Glaser and Strauss's approach. But this one, done by Chalmers, provides a more detailed, in-depth analysis, or mas preferred ito ng mga serious na mga researchers kasi it's done in a way na, of course, very effort intensive and exhaustive, and at times mag-give up ka na kasi sa dami ng steps na involved, pero it will provide you a very good result later on kasi effort intensive siya pero worth it in the end. I have never done this pa, kaya medyo nangangapa ako sa explanation about this one, pero I can provide you an example of a study that did constructivist approach by Chalmers. Alright, so para hindi tayo malito whether or not we are using Glaser and Strauss's GT approach to Chalmers's constructivist approach, meron tayong common steps regardless of the variants of grounded theory. So here is the common steps in grounded theory design. So ang dami kong sinabi dun sa una, pero later on magkakaroon pala tayo ng ganito. Okay, so firstly, determine your initial research questions. So of course, 1 to 2 questions would do. Secondly, recruit and collect data. So magre-recruit ka ng sample population and then magko-collect ka ng data out of the interviews that you do. So ang mag-guide sa'yo ay tinatawag nating theoretical sampling. So sa research class, meron tayong 2 types of sampling. Sampling refers to sa pagkuha mo ng participants or pag-recruit mo ng participants para sa study mo, and eventually pag-collect ng data. So meron tayong dalawang kinds of sampling. First is we have the statistical sampling, which is both probability and non-probability sampling. Sa statistical sampling kasi, fix na yung number of participants mo, fix na yung method mo ahead of the data collection that you will be doing later on. So alam mo na yung bilang ng participants, fix na yung bilang ng participants mo, ganun ang ang statistical sampling. Pero in grounded theory, you are doing theoretical sampling. Ang theoretical sampling naman, as you go along with your data collection, halimbawa ang initial na gusto mo na bilang ng participants ay 5. Pero as you collect your data, parang nakukulangan ka. So therefore, you have to recruit 5 more or 10 more participants. So ganun ang theoretical sampling. It's not fixed. It's not rigid just like in statistical sampling, but rather you recruit and collect your data hanggang sa marating mo yung theoretical saturation na tinatawag. Gets? Theoretical saturation, it's that point in time na wala ka nang makukolect na data because na-build mo na yung theory mo and satisfied ka na sa collection mo ng data. So, ganun ang grounded theory in terms of data collection and recruitment of participants. You recruit more and collect data more as needed or as the need arises. Number 3, break transcripts. So from those interviews that you did, you now break your transcripts into excerpts. Excerpts, statements yan, na parang doon sa halimbawa, example na binigay ko in Phenomenology when I did an interview with that person who suffered from a typhoon, So yung statement niya, kukunin mo yung excerpts and then you do your open coding na. So i-code mo na ngayon yung mga statements na iyon into themes. And then, after open coding, you now group your excerpts into codes. Okay? So, 3 and 4, same process yan. And for for step number 5, you now group codes into categories. Ito yung actual coding na tinatawag, ha? Kung nalilito pa rin kayo dito, balikan nyo yung step na nabanggit natin kanina. So for number 6, analyze more excerpts and compare with codes. So mag-analyze ka ng more excerpts. So halimbawa nag 5 participants ka, marami silang mga sinabi. Okay, magkukuha ka ng excerpts. Excerpts basically refers to snippets or bits of statements coming from the interviews that you did, from the transcribed interviews that you did. So for number 7, since ang grounded theory ay very exhaustive and intensive and iterative, repeat steps 2 to 6 until you reach theoretical saturation. So, halimbawa, 5 yung participants mo, and then nakulangan ka sa data kasi parang as you build your codes, parang it's not enough for you to build your theory. And so, therefore, you have to repeat steps 2 to 6 hanggang sa ma-reach mo yung tinatawag nating theoretical saturation. So, I'm pretty sure na familiar na kayo sa ibig sabihin ng theoretical saturation. 8. So, after doing all those steps, you now define the central idea, and that is now the last step, that is the selective coding. So, from open coding to actual coding to number 8, which is now your selective coding. So, after that, you now write your grounded theory, and it means congratulations, you are now done with your study. So itong mga common steps na to class sa grounded theory design, it is why I don't encourage you to undertake grounded theory research kasi masyadong time consuming, exhaustive, effort intensive, and hindi mo matatapos yan within 1 semester or even a year. Kasi syempre pandemic, so it limits your time to do data collection and so on and so forth, and so it's not advisable to do this kapag bago ka pa lamang na researcher. Okay, so malapit na tayo sa katotohanan. So selection of qualitative social research design. Okay, so paano yung pagpili mo ng research design dun sa 4? So ano yung mga pipiliin mo doon? Halimbawa, okay. Now, ito yung pinaka-importanting tip or suggestion, Sa pagpili mo ng qualitative social research design, the research questions or objectives inform or dictate the research design or approach that you are to do. Kung ang topic mo ay kung ang research question mo ay tungkol sa profiles ng mga respondents then it's not advisable for you to do qualitative social research design, much less undertake grounded theory, narrative research, or phenomenology. Ulitin ko ha, yung type of research questions mo or objectives mo dictates ang siyang magga-guide sa'yo doon sa uri or klase ng research design or approach na gagawin at gagamitin mo. Other factors. Una, syempre yung training mo, researchers training and experiences with different forms of qualitative design. If you're not familiar with grounded theory, then don't do that. If you're not familiar with phenomenology, then do that. But if you are interested and at least meron kang basic understanding sa case study, then by all means do it. Partiality to a specific approach or design. If much interested ka sa case study and sa tingin mo ito yung makakabigay sa iyo ng kasagutan doon sa research questions mo, particularly yung method mo sa paghahanap ng kasagutan sa mga research questions mo, kung case study ang naisip mo, then do it. Okay, so researchers' comfort level with structure, writing style, and final written product that design produces. So, ito yung mga considerations natin sa pagpili ng qualitative social research design. Okay, so para mas bigyan tayo ng elaboration dito, so kailan gagamitin ang phenomenology, when to use that, when to use case study, when to use narrative research, when to use grounded theory. So in a phenomenology, you are to use that when the researcher seeks to understand the lived experiences. For case study, when a researcher has a case bounded by time or place that can inform a problem. Pag sa narrative research, when detailed stories help in understanding a problem. Sa grounded theory, when no theories exist or existing theories are inadequate. So these are the only things that you consider when doon sa tanong na when to use them. Type of research question. Sa phenomenology, you are to use essence questions about what is at the essence of a person's experiences about a phenomenon. Sa case study, in-depth descriptive questions, how different cases or a single case provide insights into a problem or issue. Sa narrative research, chronologically oriented questions. So, from day 1, year 1 to year 10 to year 100, so to speak. Sa grounded theory, gagamit ka ng process questions about experiences or changes that have stages or phases. Okay, so another thing. So, ito yung mga sample research questions for the four different types of qualitative research design. For phenomenology, for example, ang topic, so I provided there, remote learning and teaching among political science students at ITSU during the pandemic. So that's that topic. Ngayon, to give you an idea about the type of research questions that you can use, depende sa qualitative research design mo. For example, for that topic, and gagamit ka ng phenomenology, ang magiging uri or klase ng research question mo ay ito. What are the lived experiences of IPSU political science students of the first semester, academic year 2021 to 2022? Second question, what are the meanings and essences that the pol-sci students attach to remote learning during a pandemic? So these are two valid questions that you can raise for the topic of remote learning and teaching among pol-sci students at ITSU during the pandemic. Now, kapag case study ang approach mo naman to answer or to provide you answers to any research questions for your topic, ito yung magiging question mo. How did the political science faculty redesign their courses and remotely taught their courses, particularly the major subjects, during the first semester academic year 2021-2022? So that's for case study. For narrative research naman, what do the stories of new freshman students tell us about remote learning and teaching? For grounded theory, it's like this. What will best explain the effective remote delivery of political science students' subjects courses in IPSU during the pandemic? Example, redesigning the courses, training of teachers, internet connectivity, and support services to both the students and instructors. So makikita natin yung yung differences between the different research questions that you can raise, depende yan sa uri or klase ng social research design mo for qualitative, for the topic of remote learning. Now, for implementing your qualitative social research design, so same thing pa rin, for sample size for phenomenology, 10 or more individuals. Selected individuals who have experienced the phenomenon and reached saturation. May nag-aaway na kapitbahay. For case study, a single case or multiple cases. Alright, so balikan natin kasi may nag-aaway kanina. So for phenomenology, there are 10 or more individuals. For case study, single case or multiple cases, depends on the type of case study and variations of cases in the field. For narrative research, 1 or more individuals. For grounded theory, 20 to 30 participants, pero depende yan sa theoretical sampling mo and yung theoretical saturation mo din. For data collection, for phenomenology, primarily interviews, although documents, observations, and others may be considered. For case study, multiple forms yan. Interviews, observations, documents, and artifacts. For narrative research, interviews plus documents. For grounded theory, primarily interviews ang gagamitin mo. Okay, for the data analysis and strategies, so for phenomenology, bracketing, so alam na natin yan. Horizontalization, meaning units or themes, textual description, structural description, essence of the phenomenon. So, nabanggit ko na ito kanina. For case study, description of the cases and themes with in-case and across-case analysis. For narrative research, identifying themes and context, and then restoring. For grounded theory, you are to do open, actual, and selective coding, and then you are now going to do your schematic diagram of the theory that you had constructed. For final output of the study for phenomenology, description of common experiences. For case study, multiple forms yan. Interviews, observations, documents, and artifacts. For narrative research, detailed picture analysis of individuals. For grounded theory, a theory often portrayed as in a visual model. So that is it for now. We continue with constructing an instrument for data collection in the next video lecture. So I apologize for the sudden interruption kanina. There's a neighbor going berserk over there. So till next time, thank you so much for listening. लगी तेरे दिल को दिल लगी न लगे